The snow was falling harder now, and somewhere out there, 2 lives hung by a thread. Henry Vaughn never expected to be a hero. Hell, he never expected much of anything anymore. But when your job is keeping broken things running on a dead moon, you learn that sometimes broken things include people. Nur 6 was never built for comfort. It was a mining moon, cold as death and twice as unforgiving. The companies that owned it cared about one thing: pulling valuable minerals from the frozen ground. They didn't care much about the people who did the actual work. The surface looked like the end of the world, jagged ice formations stretching for miles. Broken rocks scattered everywhere, and wind that could cut through your soul. Henry was one of the maintenance guys. His job was simple: keep the power on, keep the air clean, and make sure nobody died from equipment failure. He'd been doing this work for 2.5 years now, which was way longer than he'd planned. Most people couldn't handle Sector 9. They said it was too far from civilization. It's too dangerous, too quiet. For Henry, the quiet was exactly what he needed. After what happened to his sister during the VAR collapse, when a power reactor exploded, and the emergency evacuation failed, Henry couldn't deal with crowds anymore. He couldn't handle hearing people call for help when he couldn't save them. Out here, nobody expected him to be a hero. He just had to show up, fix whatever was broken, write his reports, and go back to his small shelter. It was lonely, but it was safe. That morning started like any other. Henry was working on some backup power connections near a cracked ridge when his communication device started making weird static noises. Then it went completely dead. A second later, his emergency scanner lit up with a weak signal. The beeping was so faint he almost missed it. Henry squinted at the small screen, showed 2 life signs, not moving, with no response when he tried to contact them. No heat source either, which was bad news on a moon where the cold could kill you in minutes. He checked the location about 1 kilometer south, near a path that small transport ships use for carrying supplies and workers. There weren't supposed to be any flights today. Henry stared at the scanner, its mind racing. The smart thing to do would be to report this to headquarters and wait for the emergency team. But Sector 9 was in what they called the emergency dead zone. Help could take hours to arrive, and these signals were so weak that whoever was out, they probably didn't have hours. They might not even have minutes. He should have followed the rules. He should have made the call and waited. But he'd end single quotes to do. Instead, Henry packed his digging equipment, threw his gear on his back, and started walking toward the signal. With each step, the terrain got worse. A storm had torn through this area earlier in the week, leaving thick snow covering sharp rocks and twisted pieces of metal. The wind was picking up again, making his eyes water and his face sting as he got closer to the signal's location. Henry noticed something strange. The snow ahead of him was piled up in an unnatural way, like a small hill. One side was caved in with sharp breaks along the edge. He'd seen this before. It was the aftermath of an avalanche, and it looked recent. His scanner beeped again. The 2 signals were still there, but now they were buried under several meters of snow and debris. Henry knelt down in the snow, pulled off his thick gloves, and turned on his thermal digger. The freezing air burned his lungs as he worked, carving down through layer after layer of packed snow and bent metal. His arms ached from the effort, and his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his neck. He didn't know who he was digging for. He didn't even know if they were still alive. But something deep inside told him that stopping would be wrong. After 20 long minutes of digging, his tool hit something solid, reinforced hull plating from a shuttle. Henry cleared away enough snow to expose an emergency hatch. The control panel was dark, no power. He jammed a metal bar into the door seam and put all his weight behind it. The metal groaned in protest, then suddenly snapped open with a loud crack. A wave of freezing air rushed out from inside the shuttle. Henry climbed into the broken cabin, his breath visible in the dim light from dying emergency strips. The narrow space was eerily quiet. There on the floor were 2 bodies curled together under collapsed cargo netting. Their arms and legs were tangled together in a way that didn't look planned. It looked like pure instinct. Like one was trying to protect the other. They were female aliens, Orellans, based on their pale, icy blue skin and delicate bone structure. The older one was wrapped tightly around the younger one, as if shielding her from harm. Both wore emergency suits, thin, clingy fabric designed for short-term protection, not for surviving a full avalanche. The suits were ripped at the hips, shoulders, and legs. Their exposed skin showed the early signs of frostbite, pale patches, and stiff joints. Henry dropped beside them, his heart racing. "Vitals," he whispered, turning on his portable medical scanner. It took a moment, then flashed a weak confirmation. They were barely alive, irregular pulse, dangerously low blood pressure. He looked at their faces. One appeared to be in her 20s, while the other looked younger, with softer, more innocent features. Both were unconscious, breathing so shallow he could barely see their chests moving. "Damn it," Henry muttered. He pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around the younger one first, tying the sleeves tight around her chest. Then he unzipped his personal heat pack and pressed it against the older woman's stomach. The warmth barely registered on his scanner. They were too cold. He had to move fast, one at a time. Henry lifted them out of the wreckage and carried them on his back through the deep snow and scattered rocks. The wind was getting stronger, howling like an angry beast trying to tear the skin from his face. His muscles burned with each step, and he almost dropped the younger one when his boots slipped on a patch of hidden ice, but he kept going. His shelter was half a kilometer away, and he pushed himself to move faster. The doors opened automatically when his ID card triggered the lock. Warm, dry air hit him like a physical force. Henry dropped to his knees, gently lowering both women onto the padded thermal mat near the main heating vent. His hands moved automatically, following emergency medical training he'd hoped never to use. Remove outer layers, stimulate blood flow. Apply warming gel to key pressure points on the neck, wrists, and chest. He carefully stripped their damaged suits down just enough to check for injuries. As he worked, Henry noticed something strange. Their skin was reacting, showing a slight flush, and their pulses were getting faster. Their body temperatures were rising unusually fast, not like a fever, but something else entirely. He paused for a moment, confused, but didn't stop his treatment. He wrapped them in warm blankets, tucked heat cells between their legs and against their backs, then sat back, breathing hard and watching them breathe. His small shelter wasn't designed for guests. One room, one bed, basic supplies. He had no idea who these women were, why they were out in the storm, or how close they'd come to dying. He should have felt calm after all. He'd saved them. But instead, he felt tense, afraid, uncertain, and guilty. The guilt was the worst part. The last time he'd carried someone out of a failing facility, they hadn't survived. Henry looked down at the younger woman. Her hand twitched slightly, barely touching his boot. Her lips parted, dry and cracked from the cold. She whispered something, just one word. "Henry." He froze. She didn't know his name. She was unconscious. How could she possibly know who he was? Henry sat back slowly, his eyes locked on the two sleeping forms. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. Something had started here, something he didn't understand, and he had no idea how to stop it. Hours passed. Henry sat beside the makeshift bed he'd created on the heated mat, his back against the cold steel wall of his shelter. The steady hum of the ventilation system filled the silence, covering the sound of the two women's slow, shallow breathing. He hadn't slept at all. Every few minutes, he checked their vital signs again, adjusted the heat packs, examined their eyes, and noted any changes in their skin color. The older one, who looked to be in her mid to late 20s, still hadn't moved. The younger one had. Muttered once more in her sleep. His name again, that single word that wouldn't leave his mind. She didn't know him. She couldn't have. So why did she keep saying his name? Henry tapped his diagnostic console again. They were definitely Borellans. Their physiology was unmistakable. Fine bones, elongated limbs, and skin tones that shifted subtly with metabolic changes. But there was something odd in the medical readings. Their body temperatures were rising too quickly and too evenly to be random. Their blood oxygen levels had stabilized, which was good, but their hormone responses were elevated far beyond what normal recovery from hypothermia should have caused. The scanner flagged it as a possible bond phase response. Henry frowned. He'd heard of this before, but only in passing. Borellans were genetically modified centuries ago for survival and compatibility with their environmental partners. Some rare bloodlines, especially in the older family lines, were rumored to undergo something called imprinting, an involuntary physical response to rescue trauma. It was designed to create immediate dependence on their rescuer, a built-in survival mechanism that kicked in during life-threatening situations. Scientists called it the bonding phase, though most dismissed it as pseudoscience. But the medical data didn't lie. The younger woman stirred again, her breathing catching in her throat. Eyes fluttered open, startlingly bright against her. Pale skin, almost silver in the shelter's low light. Henry leaned forward carefully. "Hey, you're safe. You're in my shelter in Sector 9. Can you understand me?" She blinked slowly, her lips dry and cracked. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse and barely audible. "Where's Lila?" "Here," Henry said, gesturing to the still unconscious woman beside her. "She's breathing. She hasn't woken up yet, but her vital signs are getting stronger." Relief flashed across the girl's face. She let out a long breath and closed her eyes for a moment before opening them again, focusing intently on Henry's face. "You pulled us out," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes. What happened to your shuttle?" "Crushed. Avalanche buried it." The emergency beacon barely got through. There was a long pause as she tried to sit up, but winced as her weak muscles protested. Henry helped her gently, propping her up with a folded supply pack. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nerali," she whispered. "She's my sister Lila. We were trying to cross the southern ridge when our pilot abandoned us mid-flight. When the storm warning sensors went off, he jettisoned us early, said we were dead weight." Henry stared at her in disbelief. "He left you in the middle of a storm." Her face tightened with anger and hurt. "Toi. He was from the contractor corps, hired transport with no loyalty, just interested in credits. Our family couldn't afford a bonded pilot." Henry didn't respond immediately. He understood the system well enough. On backwater moons like Nurse 6, people like Nerali and her sister were expendable. If you couldn't pay for proper protection, you became just another statistic waiting to happen. Nerali looked at him again, this time more carefully, studying his face. "You're human. I thought this sector was unmanned. It mostly is. I handle maintenance for 3 adjacent outposts. This one's empty except for me." He paused. "I'm Henry Vaughn." "Henry," she echoed softly, then gave him a look that made his skin prickle within a strange energy. "I said your name while I was unconscious." "Didn't I?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "You did." Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Nerali touched her neck, wincing at the sensation from the medical injectors he'd used to help stabilize her condition. Something was happening here. Something neither of them fully understood yet. But as Henry looked into her silver eyes, he realized that saving her life might have been the easy part. What came next was going to be much more complicated. "Mark, you stabilized us, rewarmed us. I did what I could," he said. "Your vitals air holding, but something's happening with your systems." The scanner flagged a bonding response. Her expression didn't change. "So it's true," she murmured. "You're the one we burned." For Henry stood Theward's hit too fast, too directly. "That's not. I didn't do this for that. I just found you. I wasn't trying to trigger anything." She shook her head gently. "You don't have to defend yourself. It's not something you did. It's what we are. Virulent females from a value line after trauma. If we're rescued by someone genetically compatible, the bond forms automatically. Our bodies choose our minds, catch up later." He ran a hand through his hair, Jaw clenched. You're saying you're what bound? To me now, she didn't answer immediately, then we daunt us. Or it's like bound. That's not what this is. It's not obedience. It's orientation, focus, instinct turns toward one who saved us, who kept us warm. It's survival turned inward, and your sister, she, hasn't woken yet, but she'll feel it too, maybe differently, maybe stronger. She's more restrained, more practiced at hiding what she feels. Henry sat down again, slower this time. His shoulders were tight, his hands had started shaking without him realizing. I didn't sign up for this. I know. He looked over at Leary. She hadn't moved, still too pale, still caught somewhere between survival and system shock. He wondered what she'd say when she woke, if she'd been angry, afraid, grateful, or something else entirely. Is this bond permanent? It can fade, Norelli said, if the feelings aren't returned, if the instinct isn't support. But if it's left incomplete, if the system doesn't stabilize through contact affection. Warmth, closeness, it starts breaking down, we overheat. Lose the orientation, eventually collapse our nervous system, eats its cell from thine side. You're saying if I don't respond, you die. I'm saying if you don't stay near us, if we don't feel safe, close a cousin, we might. Henry stood again, pacing now the implications. Twisted his stomach. This wasn't gratitude. It wasn't even romance. It was biological override. Like Simeon had flipped a switch in them and thrown the burden on him. I'm not going to use you, he said, voice firmer now. Not just because your system tells you I'm a good match. I won't take advantage of that. Norali smiled faintly. That's sickly. Why our bodies chose you. The line hit him harder than it should have. The storm hadn't let up, snow still pounded. The outer shell of the shelter, the signal uplink, was down. No one was coming. No one even knew they were here, but now Zenri wasn't alone in the outpost, and he wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. The shelter's lights had dimmed to standby mode, mimicking night, but Henry didn't sleep. Sat by the console, one eye on the diagnostics feed, the other on the quiet forms. Wrapped in thermal blankets behind him, the storm still howled outside, wind battered the reinforced panels, and rhythmic waves, and every so often the structure creaked. Subtle, deep, like the exhale of something ancient pressing in from all sides. Leary hadn't woken. Neuralize leapt, restlessly, brow furrowed, murmuring incoherent fragments in her native dialect. She drifted off a few hours ago, but her body remained tense. Henry had taken 3 steps back since their conversation, literal steps across the room, and hadn't returned. He couldn't, not yet. He needed space to think. She said it wasn't choice, it was instinct, but that didn't make it easier. The scanner logs still glowed on the console. Hormonal spikes, accelerated neurological activity, bonding phase response. It read like a slow motion systems. Failure masked as emotional urgency. Henry leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. No one had trained him for this. He was a tech, not a caretaker, not a mate. Why hadn't Larry woken yet? That question clung to him. Harris walked over to check her again. Her skin was warm now, color returning, faint pink over blue. Her breathing had deepened, but her eyelids never moved. Hedge used the blanket, careful not to disturb her more than necessary. Then he paused her. Hand twitched beneath the fabric, curling slightly toward his wrist. Leary, he said quietly. No answer. Has stood there a moment longer, unsure of what he wanted to see her eyes open, or for her to stay asleep so he could delay the next conversation, whatever Norelli had told him. It was clear this wasn't just some inherited reflex. Their bodies weren't just reacting, they were changing, zinking to him in a way that felt invasive, unnatural, and yet oddly human. Backed away and returned to the console. He needed more information. The terminal's connection to the broader net was still frozen, but local data was still accessible. He pulled up archived medical logs on Virlin. Cast biology, the Veluin line, was mentioned. Rare isolated bird for high sensitivity adaptation during long-term space colony seeding, originally designed to survive extreme psychological pressure by imprinting rapidly on safe authority figures in traumatic conditions. Bonding response was a last resort, override a biological shortcut to trust. He read a line twice. Bonded state once triggered. Releases endorphins only in the presence of the cozened individual. Without contact, the subject suffers a systemic degradation, resembling acute autoimmune collapse. Henry swallowed hard. He understood what that meant. They wouldn't just get sick, they'd suffer painfully, slowly, and the worst part, he didn't know how to turn it off, or even if it could be turned off behind him. He heard movement, a gasp. Headed sharply, Leary was sitting up. Barely her blanket slipped from hers, Holder's hair falling in. Damp strands around her face. She looked at him like, didn't quite believe he was real. Her lips moved before sound came. Neuralicia's okay, Henry said, standing, sleeping. Leary nodded slowly, gaze heavy with exhaustion. And confusion, she looked around. The shelter eyes scanning thralls, the consoles, the heat vents, then back to him. You brought us here. Hadn't answer. He didn't need to. She pressed a hand to her forehead. I felt it before I woke, something inside pulling toward. You I didn't ask for it, he said quietly. I just pulled you out. That's all. She nodded again, not in disagreement. Just acknowledging the truth. You smell like the coat, she said. After a moment, what the one wrapped around me? It smells like you, that's why. I kept breathing. It reminded me I wasn't dead yet. Henry looked away. I didn't think I'd survive, she continued. We knew the pilot was going to abandon us. We saw the alert when we heard the bay doors unlock mid-flight. We grabbed onto each other. Nerali tried to override the ejection protocol. She failed. Why were you even out there? Henry asked. There's nothing past the ridge but failed mining outposts and ice. Who sends two unarmed women through a dead sector? Lear expression tightened. We weren't sent. We were escaping. The sentence hit like a bolt. Escaping. What does it matter? It does. To me, she hesitated. We were part of a reproductive caste experiment, a closed bloodline. Breeding initiative in the inner systems. When demand dropped, we were deemed non-viable, discarded, sold off to low-tier colonies under migration clearance. It's not slavery technically, but once you're off the main routes, no one asks questions. Henry stared at Hiryu. We're discarded like broken tools. She met his eyes. We're from a long line of fertility prototypes, Mr. Vaughn, when our genes no longer meet quota. We're a considered waste. He felt his stomach twist. Everything Nerali had said. Now, had weight not instinct, not fantasy, trauma, engineered dependence? They hadn't chosen this. They had been shaped to react this way, and now, so had he. I'm not going to ouse you, he said, again more firmly this time. Lear's voice was softer. We know that's why we're burning. She let the words hang, not as accusation, as fact, headed to the wall, jaw clenched. You need real help, medical evac, biostabilisme, but we need time, and you're the only one here. Nerali stirred again, moaning. Quietly in her sleep, Leary watched her. She get worse before she stabilizes. I'll too, that's how it works, and it only stops when the one we bonded with allows the bond to complete. And what does that mean? Touch? Warmth. Choice looked directly at him. Not obligation, but not absence either. Henry walked over to the window. Not that there was much to see, just a static layer of ice and darkness beyond the frost lace pane. He didn't speak for a long time. Behind him, two women, discarded, genetically molded, desperate for survival, lay in a shelter. They didn't ask to be here, and neither did he. But they were here, and now he had to decide what kind of man he was going to be in the days ahead. Henry barely slept. He'd moved a cot into the narrow supply alcove, just far enough to give the sisters space, but close enough to hear Ifanethi. Went wrong. The shelter's air recyclers kept a steady, low hum, punctuated now and then by distant groans from the frozen structure. As wind pressure shifted, he stared at the ceiling for hours, every muscle tightenable to relax, mind churning through facts, instincts, and what ifs he couldn't turn off. When he finally drifted off, it was shallow and fractured, dreamless sex. For flashes of silver blue skin and half-formed phrases echoing in Thederk, a sharp, ragged cough snapped him awake. He was up in seconds. Pulling the thermal curtain aside, Nerail sat curled against the heating conduit. Trembling, our skin glistened. With sweat lips parted, breathing fast, the blanket had slipped down her back, revealing the full curve of her spine. Bare beneath the broken shoulder strap of her suit, her fingers clawed weakly at the floor mat. "Help." Henry knelt next to her. "You're overheating." She nodded shakily. "It burns under the skin. It won't stop." Herbity temperature was spiking fast. He grabbed a med scanner. Oxygen saturation had dropped. Heartbeat erratic. Leary stirred beside. Her eyes barely open, hair expression stricken, but dazed. Henry grabbed water, held it to Nerali's lips, tried to drink, but choked halfway through. He steadied her arms around her back. Her skin was hot to hot. Her body shuddered against him. "I can't breathe without you close," she whispered. "It's not in my head. My body is pulling toward yours. Like I'm drowning in your air." "I'm here," he said, trying to sound calm. Booth's voice came out dry. "I didn't want to feel like this." Her forehead pressed against his chest. "I wanted to want you, need you." Leary sat up slowly. Her voice came rough but clear. "It's starting in me." To Henry, looked at her. Her pupils were wide. She wasn't sweating yet, but her breathing had shifted, measured, but shallow. "I can hold it off longer than she can," she said, "but it's not going to stop." Henry helped Nerali lie back down, drape a cool gel cloth across her neck, then turned to Larry. "What happens if I don't touch you?" "Nothing immediately," she said, "but after a few days. Fever, weakness, then nerve failure. We could survive it barely. But the damage sticks." "We weren't made to reject the bond once it starts." "See, we're made?" he asked. Leary hesitated. "Our line was stabilized generations way while crawled colonies. Selective imprinting was seen as a safeguard for colony success, but the results were unpredictable. The program was quietly shut down, and yet it was still passed down." She gave a tired nod. "Some bloodlines never filtered out." Henry stood again, pacing. "You don't want this. It's not love, it's reflex. I'm just the first warm body that didn't abandon. You know, Leary," said voice firmer, "it's not just survival. You gave us care when you didn't have to. That's not a chemical trigger. That's what the bond latched onto. You saw us as people, not cargo, not property." He stared at her. Her voice was steady now, though her hands trembled slightly. "Why didn't you tell me more in the beginning?" he asked. "Would you believe?" she replied. "You'd already decided to carry us through a storm. We needed you to stay, and I was afraid that if you'd know everything, you'd walk away." "I still could." Leary looked away. "I know Thieselins." Dragged. Nerali whimpered again, shifting under the blanket. Her face was flused, her breathing broken by soft gasps. It was getting worse. Henry sat down between them. His shoulders sagged. "I'm not going to take advantage of either of you. We know," Leary said again. "That's why this is killing her." He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and extended his hand toward Nerali. She took it immediately, fingers trembling around his. Her breathing eased, slight lipples slowing. Then he looked at Leary. "I'm not sure what to do, but I won't let either of you suffer alone," she exhaled slowly, as if that one sentence had let something out she hadn't been able to hold anymore. Then she moved closer, not touching, just sitting beside him, the edge of her leg brushing his. They stayed like that, three bodies in a cramped shelter. Nothing between them but truth, heat, and a bond none of them had asked for. Outside, the storm still raged. Eight sighed. Something steadier had started, fragile, real, and for the first time Nanyaf them felt entirely alone. The storm didn't let up the next day. If anything, it grew worse. Dense sheets of snow scoring the shelter's outer panels, winds loud enough to shake the metal frame with a low groaning sound. They echoed through the floor. It should have been unbearable, but inside the pressure had shifted. The heat wasn't coming from wall vents anymore. It came from proximity. Henry had stayed on the floor between their sleeping mats all night. He hadn't touched them, except for Nerali's hand still laced with his. He tried to pull away once her pulse had spiked instantly. She gasped in her sleep. He didn't try again. In the dim morning light, Nerali stirred, eyelids fluttering. Geppen. Her skin still held that faint sheen of heat, but the tremors were gone. Her grip loosened gently around his fingers. Not from weakness, but comfort. She looked at him, really looked. "I didn't think I'd wake up feeling better," she whispered. He said nothing, just nodded taunts. Her voice dropped. "Did you sleep a little?" He lied. She squeezed his hand, then let go, slowly testing. Herself, her breathing held steady, her pupils didn't contract, but her body no longer trembled with every shift in temperature behind them. Leary had woken earlier, but hadn't spoken yet. She sat against the far wall, still wrapped in a thermal blanket. Arms crossed lightly, legs drawn close to her chest. Watching, always watching, Henry stood and crossed to the counter, pour a measured amount of synth meal into a pan, started the rehydrator. It hissed quiet light scent of protein slurry and neutral grains. Filled the space bland, but welcome your stabilizing, he said. Tonerelle for now, she replied, but it's not over. Lear's voice cut in. He knows. Thathan returned to her. Then tell me what comes next. Clearly no coded language, no instinct talk. What do you? Nietzsche hesitated, then stood slower than normal, cautious. Her body moved stiffly, as if parts of her were just now remembering how we can function, she said. But if the bond remains incomplete, the symptoms return. Slower, yes, but relentless, it's not. Just about survival anymore. It's neurological. Now our systems have already begun reinforcing you as the egulating presence. I'm not a drug. Henry said flatly. You're not, Leary replied chemically. You're a biological tether. You didn't choose it, and neither did we, but no, we have to live with it. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes scanning both of them. Then what do you want from Met time? Leary said. Closeness, and when it feels right, contact willingly given. Thebin requires acknowledgement, not just physical proximity, but emotional permission. Henry didn't reply immediately. He stared out the narrow frost-lined viewport. The storm showed no signs of passing whiteout conditions, no transmissions, no exits. Then he said quietly, this place was supposed to be empty. Leary moved closer but kept distance between them. It was until you decided to change that, until you carried us out of the wreckage instead of leaving us. Nerali sat up fully. No blankets sliding down our back, Henry. It's not a curse, it's connection. We're not asking you to fix us. We're asking you to stay human and let us be something with you, real, not program netinry. Stepped away from the counter, slowly lowering himself to the floor between them. Again he looked at Larry Thonarali. His voice was low, honest. I'm scared. Leary nailed across from him, sore. I don't want to be ripped or dependent on, like I'm some key to survival. I don't even know what it means to be needed like that. Not since. Has stopped himself. Your sister, Leary said softly. I saw the grief on your face when you first looked at us. It was familiar. Nerali tilted her head. What happened, Toer? They stayed like that, 3 bodies in a cramped shelter. Nothing between them but truth, heat, and a bond none of them had asked for. Then he breathed out slow. She died in a collapsed Vestin reactor. I got out. She didn't. I was her rancher. She told me that all the time, and I've failed her since then. I've been keeping everyone at arm's length. If I don't get close, no one else breaks. When I fail, you didn't fail us. Nerali Seydu carried us through a storm, and you stayed after you learned what we were. Leary added. Silence settled between them, but this time it wasn't empty. Henry reached out, hand open, an invitation, no to demand. Leary took it, resting her palm lightly in his Nerali's fingers. Slide Dinto. His other hand warm and steady. They sat like that, 3 bodies connected, not by orders or survival instinct or biology. Alone, but choice for the first time since the crash. None of them were burning, and the storm howling outside like a beast and eyed slowly began to fade. The storm broke that night. The winds softened, no longer howling like a threat outside the shelter walls for the first time in days. The silence was intense. It felt settled inside. The air was warm, steady. The emergency lights ran low, casting soft orange glows across the small living space. It wasn't much. Bare walls, metal grating underfoot, recycled air, and 2 threadbare cots push-a-tog there. But it felt enough. Henry stood near the utility sink, rinsing a close. Hands moved slowly, not from fatigue, but hesitation behind him. Leary sat at the edge of the bed, watching him. She hadn't spoken in several minutes. She didn't need to. Nerali lay beneath the shared blanket, now resting against the wall, her face half lit by the console glow. Her eyes were open, quiet, calm, following Henry with a softness he hadn't seen in her before. The fire that had once made her body tremble had Fedetto, a steady, manageable warmth. He turned, they were both looking at him now. Lyria stood and walked toward him barefoot on the metal floor. Her blanket slipped off her shoulders and pulled at her feet. But she didn't flinch, she wasn't shaking anymore, there was no fear in her eyes, just calm resolve. "I know you're still afraid." She said, "I'm not afraid of you." Henry said, "You're afraid of what it'll mean if you let this happen." Head didn't answer, she reached for his hand, no urgency, no heat behind. It just acquiesced. Touch her fingers threaded through his, anchoring him in the moment. "This isn't about control." She said, "We're not broken. You didn't cause this. You just gave us a reason to breathe again." He exhaled slowly. "What happens after tonight?" Her voice lowered well of together, not because of imprinting or biology, because we chose. Honorali sat up quietly, blanket held to her chest. Her voice was soft but steady. "You already saved us, Henry. This isn't about saving anymore." He looked between them. Just neighed, not with panic, but wait, the kind that came before stepping forward. The kind that didn't go away with a quick fix. Henry nodded once. Stepped forward. The moment wasn't sudden, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't a firestorm of bodies or heat. It was quiet, careful, human, reached. For Leary first, not because she asked, but because she waited. His hand cubed her face, thumb brushing along her cheekbone. She leaned into it. He kissed her slowly, forehead to forehead first, then lips. Her breath trembling slightly as she pressed closer. Narali joined them, wrapping herself behind him, arms around his torso, head resting between his shoulder blades. No words, just closeness, contact, relief. They moved together toward the bed, Leary guiding him. Danyarali pulling the blankets back. Bodhi's touched skin, warmed clothing, slipped away, not in urgency, but in quiet understanding. There were gasps, yes, shudders, but not from pain, from release, from the letting go of everything held too tightly for two. Long grief, fear, shame, doubt. He kissed both of them. They kissed him, hands moved without hesitation, breath filled the small room like life, returning. It wasn't about dominance or instinct anymore. It weighs about choosing connection, three broken people in a cold world who found something neither of them expected: comfort without condition, desire without pressure. Love not as a fix, but as something new they could build from this moment on. Much later, Henry lay between them. Leary resting against his left side, fingers tracing soft lines along his chest. Narali curled at his right, her hand tucked over his heart. None of them spoke. It didn't need to. The bond had completed, not because it had to, but because they let it, and for the first time. Henry didn't feel like someone's last hope. He felt chosen, and that somehow was enough. The storm never came back. 3 days passed in silence, real silence, not the heavy, uncertain kind from before the wind stopped screaming, the snow outside settled into gentle drifts. The atmosphere regulators reported normal pressure. Henry stepped outside once just to confirm. With his own eyes, the sky was clear, pale gray, but open. He hadn't seen daylight on. Nurse 6 in weeks inside the shelter had changed, not physically, same metal panels. Same cracking vents, same recycled air, but it felt different, warmer, lived in human. Henry sat at the small table now, a mug of bitter synth brew in his hands. Nora Levis crouched beside the paneling, adjusting the energy cell alignment. She didn't ask. She just watched how he did at once and began helping. Her movements were quick, unpolished, but eager. Shesmilled to herself when the lights flickered back into full brightness, pride in her eyes, confidence. Leary stood at the galley console, pouring warmed rations into storage packs. Her expression was calm, focused. She wassleways efficient, quiet, exact, but now she moved with a kind of ease. The tension in her shoulders was gone when they finished their tasks. Both women joined him. They didn't sit across the table. They sat beside him, one on each side. Narali leaned into his shoulder with Acquiat. Feels like we've been here for months. It's only been a week. Henry said. Leary touched his hand. A left time can happen in less time than that. The console on the far wall beeped twice. Signal connection established. Thecum network was live again. Henry didn't move to check it. You going to report us? Narali asked, half teasing. No. Henry said, not yet. Think they'll come looking for us? Leary asked softly. Maybe. Henry Kay admitted, but they won't find what they discarded. You're not that anymore, Leary nodded a quiet. Kay's acceptance passed a beat weaned them. He looked at them, both really looked. They weren't fragile anymore. They weren't fading their iceware clear. Their skin was vibrant, no longer dulled by cold or trauma. They didn't need him to survive now, that part had passed, but they still sat with him. That meant more than any bond. I've been on this moon too long, Henry said, finally. Used to think staying out here kept people safe from me, from the things I couldn't fix, but now he's stopped. It swallowed hard. Nerali took his hand. You don't have to fix us, Henry Leary lined in. You just have to stay. He looked at the console again. The comms feed wait and open channel 2 central operations requesting log status. Crew counts. Hugh walked to the panel and typed in a single line. Shelter 9 system stable occupied. No further assistance required. Then he shut the console off, well headed back. They were both standing, waiting. Nerali smiled, eyes full of mischief and warmth. So what now? Henry stepped forward and kissed her gently, and looked to Leary and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Now we live, he said. They stayed like that for a long while, pressed together under the soft hum of shelter lights. No more questionanza. More fear, and for the first time in years, Henry Vaughn wasn't surviving the cold. He had made it through. With them together, the snow still covered the world outside. But it didn't matter anymore inside the shelter. It was warmed. It was home months later. The outside had thought not fully. Narrated 6 would always be a cold place, but spring came in its own quiet way. The ice didn't bite anymore. The sun peeked through the clouds now and then in Sector 9, once abandoned and silent, pulsed with quiet, steady life. Henry stepped out onto the deck he built himself from scrap anselvage. He leaned on the rail, watching the distant ridges glow in soft morning light. The air was clean, cold, yes, but breathable. He sipped his tea. Let the silence settle in his bones behind him. The shelter doors opened with a spothus. Nerali padded out barefoot, wrapped in a thick woven robe. Her hair had grown out, wild white curls falling past her shoulders. She walked right up to him, leaned into his back, arms slipping around his waist. Smells like snow, she mumbled against him. It always does here. She smiled and kissed the base of his neck, not complaining. Another sound came from the doorway, soft, deliberate steps. Leary emerged next, her movement slower, now careful. Her robe was tied loose around her belly, her hands resting protectively just beneath a growing curve. Henry turned as she approached, and for a long moment just watched her. She caught his look and tilted her head. Still surprised, he shook his head. One still amazed, Leary stepped into his arms, and he held her gently, one hand cradling her back, the other resting against the firm warmth of her stomach. Their child growing strong. She wasn't weak, she wasn't fading. She glowed now in a way no artificial light ever could. Nerali joined them, slipping under his other arm. No one spoke. There was no need. Everything that needed to be said had already been lived through fire, struggled through choice, and now together they waited for the next season of their lives to begin. Inside the shelter, a new sleeping pod had been set up, tiny, waiting. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were a family.